betrayal and silence. The desert did not forgive, and it did not forget. Heat pressed down like a living weight, swallowing sound and breath alike. A lone tree stood against the endless stretch of dust and stone, its twisted branches clawing at a sky that offered no mercy. Beneath it, bound with coarse rope that had already cut deep into his skin, Tala waited. His body sagged forward, wrists tied high above him, forcing him to remain upright despite the exhaustion pulling him toward collapse. Blood had dried along his arms, dark against sunburnt flesh. Every breath scraped his chest, slow and uneven, as though the air itself resisted entering his lungs. Circling above, vultures traced patient patterns in the sky. They knew this was not a place of rescue. It was a place of ending. Tala lifted his head slightly, just enough to feel the sun strike his eyes. Pain sharpened his awareness, but it did not frighten him. What unsettled him was not death. It was the memory of how he had been brought here, not by enemies, but by his own people. Days earlier, the world had not felt so hollow. Water had moved gently along the riverbed, reflecting the pale gold of dusk. Tala had stood at its edge, silent as always, watching the current carry fragments of leaves and light downstream. It had been a place of quiet, away from the expectations of the tribe, away from the constant weight of duty. That was where she found him. Elena Hayes did not belong to that land, not in the way that dust and wind belonged. Her presence felt like something fragile placed in the wrong hands, something that could not survive if gripped too tightly. Yet she returned to the river often, as though it was the only place where she could breathe. She did not speak at first. She rarely did. Instead, she stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the water, her silence echoing his own. It was not discomfort that passed between them, but understanding, an unspoken recognition of something missing in both their lives. When she finally spoke, her voice carried no strength, only truth. "Do you ever feel like you're already gone, even while you're still standing?" Tala did not answer immediately. He studied her reflection in the water instead, the way it trembled with every ripple. "Yes," he said at last. That had been enough. From that moment, something began, quiet, restrained but undeniable. They met again and again in that hidden place, their conversation sparse but heavy with meaning. She spoke of emptiness, of a life chosen for her rather than by her. He spoke little, yet his presence offered what her world had denied: stillness, respect, and a kind of freedom that asked for nothing in return. It was not a physical betrayal, not then, but was something deeper. Victor Hayes noticed the change long before he understood it. Elena moved differently within the walls of their home, as though her body remained but her spirit had wandered elsewhere. She no longer reacted to his words with the same forced obedience. Her silence, once submissive, had become distant, unreachable. Victor was not a man accustomed to losing control. Suspicion took root, growing quickly into certainty. But it was not evidence that drove him, it was pride, and pride demanded an explanation. Rafe was the one who gave it to him. "There's a man," Rafe had said, his tone measured, deliberate. "Not one of us. Someone she shouldn't be near." Victor's jaw tightened. "Who?" "An Apache." The word alone was enough to ignite something dangerous. Rafe watched carefully, then added, "I've seen them near the river. Not close, but close enough." It was a lie sharpened into something believable. There had been no witness to their meetings, no proof of wrongdoing. But truth was irrelevant. The idea itself was sufficient. Victor did not question it further. Instead, he acted. Chief Nantan listened in silence as the accusations were laid before him. The tribe had always valued loyalty above all else. Betrayal was not merely punished, it was erased. To stand accused was to stand already condemned unless proven otherwise. Victor's offer came wrapped in false concern. Supplies, weapons, trade, all in exchange for justice. Nanton's gaze remained steady, but something behind it shifted. Doubt flickered, then disappeared beneath the weight of expectation. A leader could not afford hesitation, not when unity was at stake. And so the decision was made. not through truth, but through fear. They came for Tala at dawn. He did not resist at first. Confusion slowed his reaction, disbelief holding him still as familiar hands turned violent. Voices he had trusted spoke words he could not recognize, accusations thrown like stones without explanation. By the time he understood, it was already over. Bound, beaten, dragged, left beneath the tree as an offering to the wilderness. A punishment meant not just to kill, but to erase. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest trace of movement. Tala's vision blurred, the edges of the world fading in and out like a dying flame. His strength had begun to fail, his body surrendering piece by piece to exhaustion. Yet something stirred within the haze. A presence, distant, uncertain, but real. Far beyond the reach of the circling vultures, a figure stood at the edge of the desert silence. Watching, not approaching, not yet. Tala could not lift his head enough to see clearly, but instinct told him what his eyes could not confirm. She had come, and with her, the fragile possibility that this was not where his story would end. The bullet that changed fate. Night fell without ceremony, swallowing the last traces of heat and replacing them with a colder, more deliberate silence. The desert, so merciless under the sun, became something else in the dark, watchful, patient, alive with unseen movement. Tala drifted in and out of consciousness, his body no longer fully his own. Pain dulled into something distant, replaced by a heavy numbness that threatened to pull him under for good. The ropes binding his wrists had tightened with every weakened shift, cutting deeper, ensuring there would be no escape born from instinct alone. The air changed first. A faint rustling, low and deliberate, moved through the brush beyond the reach of the tree's shadow. It was not the wind. It carried rhythm, soft steps pressing into sand, cautious but purposeful. Predators. Tala did not need to see them to understand. The desert always finished what men began. His head tilted slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of movement between the darkened shapes of rock and scrub. Eyes reflected faint light, one pair, then another, low to the ground, patient, waiting for weakness to claim what remained of him. A slow breath left his chest. So this was how it would end. Not in battle, not with honor, but abandoned, reduced to something less than the man he had been. The first wolf stepped closer. Its body moved with quiet confidence, each motion controlled, measured. It circled once, testing the air, sensing no threat beyond the fading pulse of a dying man. The others lingered at a distance, their presence tightening the space around him like a closing hand. Tala's fingers twitched against the rope, a reflex without strength behind it. He did not look away. If death had come, he would meet it without turning. The wolf lowered its head, muscles coiling, ready to lunge. A sharp crack shattered the silence. The sound split through the night, violent and absolute. The wolf collapsed mid-motion, its body striking the ground in a sudden, lifeless heap. The others scattered instantly, vanishing into the darkness as quickly as they had appeared. For a moment, the world held still. Then came the echo. Tala's vision struggled to focus, his mind slow to grasp what had happened. The scent of gunpowder lingered in the air, sharp and unfamiliar against the natural rhythm of the desert. Footsteps followed, not cautious, not hesitant, decisive. A figure emerged from the darkness, moving quickly toward him, the outline unmistakable even before his senses fully aligned. Elena. She did not pause when she reached him. The rifle in her hands lowered, but her grip remained firm, as though she expected the night itself to strike back. Her breathing was uneven, her movements urgent, driven by something stronger than fear. "Tala," she said, her voice low but unsteady. He tried to respond, but the effort barely formed sound. Her hands were already at the ropes, fingers working quickly despite the rough fibers resisting her urgency. The knife she carried flashed briefly in the dim light before biting into the bindings. Each cut felt like a fracture in the silence that had held him captive. "You're still alive," she murmured, more to herself than to him. The rope gave way. Tala's body collapsed forward instantly, strength abandoning him the moment it was no longer forced to endure. He would have hit the ground if she had not caught him, her arms bracing against his weight with unexpected determination. For a brief second, neither of them moved. The distance that had once defined their connection was gone, replaced by something immediate and undeniable. There was no river between them now, no quiet space to hide behind unspoken words. Only consequence. You shouldn't have come, Tala managed, his voice rough, barely audible. Her grip tightened. I couldn't leave you here, she replied, the words carrying more truth than explanation. There was no time for more. The shot had not gone unnoticed. Elena shifted quickly, pulling his arm over her shoulder, forcing him upright despite the strain it placed on both of them. Tala's steps faltered, his weight dragging against her, but she did not stop. Move, she urged, her tone sharper now. They'll come. He did not ask who. He already knew. The canyon offered little comfort, but it offered concealment. By the time they reached its narrow entrance, Tala's awareness had begun to fade again, his body pushed beyond its limits. Elena lowered him carefully against the cool stone, her movements losing none of their urgency, despite the exhaustion creeping into her own limbs. For the first time since the shot, she allowed herself to stop. Her hands trembled as they moved over his injuries, assessing, searching for what could still be saved. The damage was worse up close. Bruises darkened across his skin, cuts left untreated, the marks of deliberate cruelty. Her jaw tightened. This had not been justice. It had been punishment without truth. Tala, she said again, softer now. His eyes opened slightly, focusing on her with effort. Why, he asked. The question held no accusation, only quiet confusion. Elena hesitated, because the answer would change everything. Victor knows, she said finally, or thinks he does. Tala's gaze sharpened, clarity cutting through the haze of pain. There is nothing to know, he replied. I know that, she said quickly. But it didn't matter. Silence followed, heavy with what neither of them needed to say aloud. Truth had never been the point. The realization settled between them, unavoidable and final. There would be no return from this. Not for him, not for her. Elena exhaled slowly, the weight of her choice pressing fully into place. They'll come for us, she said. Tala did not look away. Then we don't stay. The simplicity of his answer carried no hesitation, no doubt. Survival had replaced everything else. Elena nodded, though the movement felt heavier than it should have. Outside the canyon, the desert stretched endlessly, offering no clear path forward. Only distance, danger, and the certainty of pursuit. But for the first time, the silence between them was no longer uncertain. It was decided, and as the night deepened around them, the bond that had once existed only in stolen moments hardened into something far more dangerous. Not just connection, but commitment, a choice that would not be undone. Fugitives of desire. Dawn arrived quietly, but it did not bring peace. A pale light stretched across the canyon walls, revealing the harsh truth of what remained. The night had hidden their vulnerability. The morning exposed it without mercy. Every mark on Tala's body, every shadow beneath Elena's eyes, stood in sharp relief against the unforgiving stone. There was no illusion left. They were not escaping. They were being hunted. Tala pushed himself upright despite the protest of his wounds. The brief rest had restored only a fraction of his strength, but it was enough to move, and movement was all that mattered now. Stillness meant capture. Capture meant death. Elena watched him carefully, noting the tension in every motion. He did not ask for help, yet he did not refuse it when she stepped closer, offering silent support as he steadied himself. You won't last if you force it, she said quietly. I will last long enough, he replied. The certainty in his voice left no room for argument. They left the canyon without another word. The land beyond stretched wide and exposed, broken only by scattered rock formations and dry brush that offered little concealment. Each step carried risk, every trail a potential signal to those following behind. Elena stayed close, her awareness sharpened by necessity. The rifle rested firmly in her hands now, no longer foreign, no longer uncertain. It had become part of her survival, just as Tala had. Behind them, somewhere beyond sight, Victor was coming. She could feel it, not because she saw him, but because she understood him. He would not let this end quietly. Not when his pride had been torn open. Not when control had slipped beyond his grasp. This was no longer about truth. It was about possession. They moved through the day with careful precision, avoiding open ground when possible, choosing paths that concealed more than they revealed. Tala guided their direction without hesitation, reading the land as though it spoke directly to him. Elena followed, trusting his instincts even when her own fear pressed hard against her thoughts. By midday, the heat returned, draining what little strength they had managed to preserve. Tala's pace slowed, each step heavier than the last, though he refused to stop. "You're bleeding again," Elena said, her voice tightening. "It doesn't matter. It does if you collapse." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he paused, his gaze scanning the horizon before settling briefly on her. "If I fall," he said, "you keep moving." The words landed hard. "No," she replied, the refusal immediate, instinctive. His expression remained steady. "You cannot outrun them with me, slowing you down." "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice firm despite the fear beneath it. For a moment, the tension between them held, sharp and unyielding. Then Tala exhaled slowly, the resistance fading. Not because he agreed, but because he understood. This was no longer his decision alone. They found temporary shelter as the sun reached its peak, a narrow ridge of stone that cast just enough shadow to offer relief. It was not safe, but it was necessary. Elena guided Tala down, her movements more careful now, more deliberate. The distance between them had changed again, no longer defined by hesitation, but by something deeper, something that had taken root through shared survival. She cleaned his wounds in silence, her hands steady despite the gravity of what she was doing. Tala watched her, not with confusion, but with recognition. "You risk everything," he said. She did not look up. "I already have." The simplicity of her answer carried more weight than explanation. For a moment, neither spoke. The world narrowed to the space between them, the sound of wind moving through stone, the steady rhythm of breath that reminded them both they were still alive. Then, slowly, Tala reached for her, not out of weakness, but out of certainty. Elena hesitated only briefly before meeting him halfway. What passed between them was no longer unspoken. It was no longer restrained. It was the culmination of everything that had been denied, everything that had been forced into silence. A connection forged not in comfort, but in conflict, shaped by loss, strengthened by choice. In that moment, the world beyond them ceased to exist. There was no victor, no tribe, no past waiting to reclaim them. Only the present, only each other. The illusion did not last. A distant sound broke through the stillness, faint but unmistakable. Movement. Tala's body tensed instantly, his focus snapping back to the world beyond the ridge. Elena followed his gaze, her breath catching as she strained to see what he already sensed. Dust, rising in the distance. Not natural, not random. Riders. "They're close," Tala said, his voice low but urgent. Elena's grip tightened on the rifle, the weight of reality crashing back into place. There was no more time, no more stillness, only pursuit. They moved again, faster now, urgency overriding exhaustion. The land shifted beneath their feet as they pushed toward higher ground, seeking advantage where there was little to be found. Behind them, the distance closed. Victor did not need to see them clearly. He only needed to know they were there. By the time the sun began to fall, they reached the edge of a narrow pass, its steep walls offering temporary cover but no true escape. It was a place of decision, not safety. Tala stopped, his breathing heavy but controlled. Elena turned to him, searching his expression for something, direction, certainty, anything that might ease the tightening fear in her chest. "There's no easy way through," she said. "No," he agreed. The sound of approaching riders echoed faintly now, no longer distant enough to ignore. Elena's voice lowered. Then what do we do? Tala's gaze shifted toward the narrowing path ahead, then back to her. We stop running. The words settled between them, final and unyielding. Not surrender, but confrontation. As the shadows stretched longer across the desert floor, the truth became unavoidable. This was no longer about escape. It was about survival. And survival would demand more than endurance. It would demand everything. Redemption through fire. The narrowing pass held the last of the day's light like a fading promise. Stone walls rose on either side, steep and unyielding, trapping heat and silence within their grasp. There was no wind here, no movement except the slow settling of dust disturbed by approaching riders. The world had tightened to a single point, and everything that had been set in motion now converged. Tala stood at the mouth of the pass, his posture steady despite the strain etched into every line of his body. Blood had dried along his side, his strength worn thin, yet nothing in him suggested retreat. This place, confined and deliberate, offered one advantage. It forced an ending. Elena remained just behind him, her rifle held firmly, her breath measured though her pulse refused to slow. Fear still lived within her, but it no longer controlled her. Too much had already been lost for hesitation to have a place here. The sound of hooves grew louder. Then they appeared. Victor Hayes rode at the front, his figure rigid with purpose, his gaze fixed with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Behind him, a small group followed, men loyal not to truth, but to power. Among them, Rafe moved with quiet satisfaction, as though this moment had always belonged to him. They slowed as they approached, the distance closing until there was no space left for doubt. Victor dismounted first. His boots struck the ground with controlled force, his presence carrying the same cold authority Elena had known too well. His eyes moved over her quickly, not with relief, but with calculation. "You've made this more difficult than it needed to be," he said. Elena did not step back. "It was never going to be easy," she replied. His gaze hardened, shifting past her to Tala. "And you," Victor continued, his voice tightening, "should already be dead." Tala did not respond immediately. He stood without flinching, his silence far more deliberate than any words. "You tied him to die," Elena said, her tone cutting through the tension. "That wasn't justice." Victor's expression shifted, irritation flickering beneath control. "It was necessary," he said. He crossed a line that should never have been approached. "There was no line," Tala said calmly. "Only your fear of losing what you never owned." The words struck deeper than any weapon. Victor's composure cracked, if only for a moment. "She is my wife," he snapped, his voice rising. Elena's grip on the rifle tightened, but her voice remained steady. "I was never yours," she said. The truth settled heavily in the air, undeniable and final. It was not spoken with anger, but with clarity, the kind that could not be undone. Rafe stepped forward then, his patience worn thin. "This has gone on long enough," he muttered, reaching for his weapon. The movement was quick, but not quick enough. Tala reacted instantly. Despite the strain on his body, he moved with precision, closing the distance before Rafe could fully draw. The impact was sudden and brutal, the two colliding with force that sent them both to the ground. Dust rose around them as the struggle turned immediate and violent. Rafe fought with desperation, but Tala fought with purpose. There was no hesitation in his strikes, no wasted motion. Every movement carried the weight of what had been taken from him, every breath fueled by the need to end what should never have begun. Within moments, it was over. Rafe lay still. The desert reclaimed its silence. Victor stood frozen, the shift in power unfolding faster than he had anticipated. His confidence, once absolute, now wavered beneath the reality before him. Elena stepped forward, the rifle now raised. Not uncertain, not trembling. Decided. "It ends here," she said. Victor's gaze locked onto hers, searching for something familiar. Obedience, doubt, anything he could still control. He found nothing. Slowly, his hand moved toward his own weapon. "You won't do it," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less sharp. "You don't have it in you." For a fraction of a second, the world held still. Elena saw everything in that moment. The life she had endured, the silence she had carried, the choices made for her without consent or question. She saw the version of herself that had once stood behind him, unseen and unheard. And she let it go. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing against the stone walls, final and irreversible. Victor staggered, the force of the impact breaking through the last illusion of control he had held. His expression shifted, not to anger, but to something far more fragile. Disbelief. Then he fell. The remaining men did not move. Without Victor, without direction, their purpose dissolved. One by one, they stepped back, retreating into the distance they had come from. No one spoke. No one challenged what had just happened. The desert had taken its due. Silence returned, deeper than before. Elena lowered the rifle slowly, her arms heavy, her breath uneven as the weight of what she had done settled into place. There was no triumph in it, no relief, only the quiet understanding that some endings could never feel clean. Tala stepped beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. The world stretched outward again, no longer confined to the narrow pass, but vast and uncertain. There was no path waiting for them, no clear destination to follow. Everything behind them had been burned away. "You're free now," Tala said. Elena looked out at the open land ahead, her voice softer than before. "So are you." The words carried truth, but also something more complex. Freedom did not erase what had been done. It did not restore what had been lost. It only offered a choice. Tala glanced at her, his expression steady. "Where do you go?" Elena did not answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, past the place where the past had ended, into the space where nothing had yet been decided. After a brief pause, Tala followed. Together, they moved into the unknown, not as fugitives, not as victims, but as something newly forged between survival and desire. Behind them, the desert remained unchanged. Ahead of them, everything waited. And though the path was uncertain, one truth endured. Some stories do not end when the final shot is fired. They begin there,